The dust from the overturned supply crate still hung in the air when Winona Miller felt her knees buckle beneath her on that scorching afternoon in June of 1882. The reins of her wagon slipping through fingers that had lost all their strength after 3 days of fever that had left her hollow as a dried gourd. She had made it perhaps 2 miles outside of Chloride, Arizona, that rough mining town perched in the Surbat Mountains, where she had been trying to establish a small dressmaking business, when the sickness that had been gnawing at her insides finally won its battle against her stubborn will to press onward to the next settlement where her sister supposedly waited. The wagon lurched to a stop as her mare sensed the slack in the leather, and Winona's vision swam with dark spots that threatened to pull her down into unconsciousness right there on the driver's bench under the merciless Arizona sun. She had been a fool to leave town in this condition, but the telegram had been urgent. Her sister's words sparse but weighted with some unnamed crisis that required Winona's immediate presence in Wickenburg. A journey that should have taken 3 days if she pushed hard and the weather held. But the fever had struck on her second night in Chloride, a violent thing that left her shaking and drenched in sweat, and by morning she could barely stand. Still, she had loaded her wagon with what supplies she could manage, hitched up Daisy, her patient mare, and set out with the kind of determination that had carried her west from Missouri 2 years prior, when her parents had died within months of each other and left her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. Now that determination felt like arrogance as she swayed dangerously on the bench, her dress soaked through with perspiration that had nothing to do with the heat and everything to do with the illness burning through her blood. The road stretched out before her like a ribbon of pale dirt cutting through the desert scrub, empty and shimmering in the afternoon light. No other travelers, no help, just the endless sky and the rocky hills rising on either side like the walls of a prison. Winona tried to lift the reins again, but her hands refused to obey. They trembled uselessly in her lap, and she realized with a surge of panic that she could not feel her fingers properly. The fever was worsening. She needed water, needed shelter, needed someone, anyone. But there was nothing out here except creosote and kala cactus, and the occasional brave palo verde tree clinging to life in the arroyos. Her head lolled forward, and she felt herself beginning to slide sideways off the bench. This was how she would die, she thought with strange clarity. Alone in the desert, another fool who had overestimated their strength and underestimated the harsh indifference of this land. Her sister would never know what happened to her. The thought brought tears to her eyes, though whether from grief or the fever she could not tell. Then she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats on the hard, packed road, coming fast from behind. Winona tried to turn her head but managed only a slight movement before exhaustion dragged at her again. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, and then a voice called out, deep and alarmed. "Madam, madam, are you hurt?" The rider appeared beside her wagon in a cloud of dust, a tall man on a buckskin horse, his face shadowed by the brim of a weather-beaten hat. He swung down from his saddle with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, and in 3 strides he was at her side, his hands reaching up to steady her before she could tumble to the ground. "Easy now," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle despite its roughness. "I have got you. You are burning up with fever." Winona tried to speak, to explain, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. She managed only a weak sound before her vision narrowed to a tunnel, and then to nothing at all. When consciousness returned, she found herself lying in the back of her own wagon, cushioned by the blankets and supplies she had packed. A damp cloth rested on her forehead, blessedly cool, and someone had propped her up slightly so that her head and shoulders were elevated. The wagon was moving, the familiar creak and sway telling her they were in motion, but she was not the one driving. Winona forced her eyes open fully and turned her head with effort. Through the gap in the canvas cover, she could see the back of a man sitting on the driver's bench, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt, his hat pushed back slightly as he handled the reins with confident ease. Her rescuer, the cowboy who had found her. "Where?" she began, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She tried again, louder. "Where are we going?" The man's head turned, and she caught a glimpse of his profile, strong-jawed and tanned from years under the sun. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps no more than 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "You are awake," he said, and there was relief in his tone. "That is good. We are heading back to Chloride. You need a doctor, and that is the closest place to find one. I am Oliver Quinn, by the way. Seemed like we should know each other's names given the circumstances." "Winona Miller," she managed. "But I cannot go back. My sister, she needs me in Wickenburg. The telegram said it was urgent." Oliver was quiet for a moment, the wagon rolling steadily onward. When he spoke again, his voice was firm but kind. "Miss Miller, with respect, you would not make it another 5 miles in your condition, let alone all the way to Wickenburg. That fever is serious. You need medicine and rest, not more travel. Your sister would rather have you arrive late than not at all, I would wager." The logic of his words penetrated through the fog in Winona's mind, and she felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes again. He was right, of course. She had been foolish, reckless even, to set out when she could barely sit upright. But the telegram had frightened her, and she had no one else in this territory, no friends close enough to call on for help. Her sister was all the family she had left. "How did you find me?" she asked instead of arguing, too weak to fight. "Pure chance," Oliver replied. "I was heading back to my employer's ranch from town when I saw your wagon stopped in the road. At first I thought maybe you had thrown a wheel or your horse had gone lame, but then I saw you starting to fall, and I knew it was worse than that. You have been unconscious for about 20 minutes. I got some water into you and got you settled as best I could, then turned us around. We should be back in town within the hour." Winona closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. An hour. She could endure an hour, and then perhaps the doctor could give her something to break the fever, something to restore her strength so that she could continue her journey. Surely it would not take more than a day or two. "Thank you," she said softly. "I am grateful. I thought I was going to die out there." "You might have," Oliver said bluntly, but there was no cruelty in it, just honesty. "This desert does not forgive mistakes, especially not in summer." "What possessed you to travel alone while sick, my sister?" Winona repeated, opening her eyes again to stare at the canvas above her. "She is all I have. The telegram said she needed me urgently. I thought I could push through. I have pushed through worse before." "I do not doubt it," Oliver said, and something in his voice suggested he understood that kind of stubborn determination born of necessity. "But everyone has their limits. No shame in reaching yours." The wagon hit a rut, and Winona gasped as the jolt sent pain lancing through her head. Immediately, Oliver slowed the pace, his voice apologetic. "Sorry about that. Road gets rough in places. Just try to rest if you can. I will get you there safely." Something about the certainty in his words allowed Winona to relax fractionally, to trust this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even thought to make. She let her eyes drift closed again, listening to the steady rhythm of Daisy's hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels, and beneath it all, the occasional soft words Oliver spoke to the mare, keeping her calm and steady. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. Winona drifted in and out of feverish dreams where the wagon became a ship on a burning sea, and Oliver's voice was an anchor keeping her from floating away entirely. Once, she woke to find him beside her in the wagon bed, supporting her head while he coaxed water into her mouth from a canteen, his expression focused and serious. Another time, she heard him speaking to someone else, a man's voice she did not recognize, and realized they must have reached town. Then there were different hands, older hands, touching her forehead and wrists, and a woman's voice saying something about pneumonia and dehydration. Winona felt herself being lifted, carried, and then she was in a real bed with clean sheets, and the shadows of a room surrounded her instead of canvas walls. The fever raged higher, pulling her under, and she surrendered to it because she had no strength left to fight. The next days passed in a blur of heat and cold, of strange dreams and moments of painful clarity. Sometimes there was the doctor, an older man with spectacles and a gray beard, making her drink bitter medicine that tasted like the devil's own brew. Sometimes there was a woman, middle-aged and competent, who bathed Winona's face and changed her nightgown when the sweat soaked through. And sometimes, more often than seemed reasonable for a stranger, there was Oliver Quinn, sitting in a chair by the window or standing at the foot of her bed, his hat in his hands and concern etched on his features. Once, in a moment when the fever had loosened its grip enough for her to speak coherently, Winona asked him, "Why are you still here? You have done more than enough. Surely you have work to get back to." Oliver had been reading a newspaper, holding it up to catch the light from the window, but at her words he set it aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I told my boss what happened. He is a decent man, gave me a few days to make sure you pulled through. Besides, you do not have anyone else here, do you? Seems wrong to leave you alone." "You do not know me," Winona pointed out weakly. "I could be anyone, a thief or a swindler or worse." A small smile tugged at the corner of Oliver's mouth. "I am a pretty good judge of character, Miss Miller. And I saw how carefully you had packed your wagon, how well cared for your horse is. Those things tell me you are a person of substance, even if you make questionable decisions about traveling while ill." Despite everything, Winona found herself returning his smile, just a little. "My judgment was poor, I will admit that, but I have never been good at asking for help." "That much I gathered," Oliver said dryly. "The doctor says the pneumonia is breaking, though. You should be out of danger within another day or two, and back on your feet within a week if you take care and do not do anything foolish like trying to drive a wagon across the territory." "My sister," Winona said, the worry flooding back. "I need to send her a telegram to tell her I am delayed." "She will be frantic." "Already done," Oliver said. "I sent it 2 days ago as soon as the doctor said you would likely survive. Told her you had taken ill but were receiving good care and would come as soon as you were able. Got a reply yesterday. She said to take all the time you need to recover, that her situation was worrying but not immediately dire, and she would explain everything when you arrived." The relief that washed through Winona was so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for your kindness." Oliver shook his head, looking almost embarrassed. "No repayment needed. Anyone decent would have done the same. You just focus on getting well. That will be thanks enough." But as the days passed and Winona's strength slowly returned, she began to understand that Oliver Quinn was not just anyone, and his care had gone well beyond what basic decency required. He visited every day, sometimes twice, bringing her books to read when she was strong enough and news from the town to keep her mind occupied. He had paid the doctor's initial fees out of his own pocket, though he assured her it was a loan she could repay when she was back on her feet. He had arranged for her wagon to be stored safely, and her horse to be stabled and fed, refusing to let her worry about any practical matters until her health was restored. More than that, though, Winona found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the way his presence seemed to brighten the room, the way his stories about life on the ranch made her laugh when she had thought she had forgotten how. He had grown up in Texas, he told her, and come to Arizona 5 years ago looking for work. He was good with horses and cattle, had a talent for reading the land, and had been lucky enough to find employment with a rancher who valued skill over reputation. "What about you?" he asked one afternoon about a week into her recovery, when she was finally able to sit up in bed without her head spinning. "What brought you all the way out to Arizona territory?" Winona pleated the edge of the sheet between her fingers, considering how much to share. But Oliver had been so open with her, so generous with his time and resources, that it seemed churlish to hold back. "Necessity, mostly," she admitted. "My parents died within 6 months of each other back in Missouri. My father had debts I did not know about, and once those were settled, there was nothing left. My mother's sister had moved to Wickenburg years before, and she wrote to my sister and me, said there were opportunities out here for women willing to work hard. My sister went first about 3 years ago. I stayed to care for our parents, but after they passed, there was nothing keeping me there anymore." "And you decided to become a dressmaker?" Oliver asked. "I have always been good with a needle," Winona said. "My mother taught me. I figured in a mining town like Chloride, there would be women wanting decent dresses, something to make them feel civilized in the middle of all this roughness. I was starting to build a small clientele before I got sick." "You will build it again," Oliver said with certainty. "Once word gets around about your work, you will have more business than you can handle. The women in this town are always complaining about the lack of quality goods." The confidence in his voice bolstered Winona more than he could know. She had been so alone since arriving in Chloride, focused entirely on survival and establishing her business, that she had not realized how much she craved simple friendship, someone to talk to about more than the price of thread and the measurements for a bodice. Oliver filled that void without seeming to try, and Winona caught herself watching him when he was not looking, noticing the way the afternoon light caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes. It was dangerous, she knew, to let her thoughts wander in that direction. He was being kind to someone in need, nothing more. Once she was well, he would return to his life on the ranch, and she would return to her dressmaking, and their paths would likely never cross again. Chloride was small, but not so small that a working cowboy and a struggling seamstress would have much cause to interact. The thought brought a pang of sadness that Winona tried to ignore. By the end of the second week, the doctor pronounced her well enough to leave the boarding house room where she had been recovering and return to her own small quarters above the general store, where she had been renting space for her shop. Oliver insisted on escorting her, carrying her few belongings and making sure she was safely settled before he would leave. He had arranged for a local boy to bring her supplies up from the wagon, and everything was exactly as she had left it. Her sewing machine in the corner, her fabrics folded neatly on shelves she had built herself. "This is nice," Oliver said, looking around the compact space with its single room that served as both workshop and living quarters. "You have made it comfortable." "It is small, but it serves," Winona said, sinking gratefully into the chair by her sewing table. The walk from the boarding house had tired her more than she wanted to admit, and her legs trembled with the effort of climbing the stairs. "Thank you, Oliver, for everything." I truly do not know how to express my gratitude." Oliver set down the bag he had been carrying and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You do not need to thank me, Winona. I am just glad you are all right, but I want you to promise me something." "What?" she asked. "Promise me you will not try to make that journey to Wickenburg until you are truly recovered. Another few weeks at least. And promise that when you do go, you will let me know so I can arrange to accompany you. It is not safe for a woman to travel alone, even when she is healthy, and I would rest easier knowing you had someone watching your back." Winona started to protest that she could not ask such a thing of him, that he had already done too much, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was genuine worry there and something else she was almost afraid to name. "I promise," she said softly. "I will not go until I am fully well, and I will tell you before I leave." "Good," Oliver said, and his shoulders relaxed fractionally. "I will check on you in a few days, make sure you are settling back and all right. And if you need anything before then, you can send word out to the Double Bar Ranch. That is where I am working. Anyone in town can tell you how to find it." "I will remember," Winona said, and then, because she felt she had to know, "Oliver, why have you done all this? And please do not say it is just what anyone would do, because we both know that is not true. I am a stranger to you. You had no obligation to stay to pay the doctor to check on me every day." "Why?" Oliver was quiet for a long moment, his gaze holding hers. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "When I first saw you starting to fall from that wagon, something inside me just reacted. I could not have ridden past even if I had wanted to. And then, once I got you to the doctor and knew you were going to fight to survive, I found myself wanting to know more about the woman who would drive herself nearly to death trying to reach her sister. You have a strength in you, Winona, a determination that I recognize because I have it too. And as I sat with you those first few days, listening to you fight the fever, I realized I wanted to see what you would do once you were well again. I wanted to know the person behind that strength." He paused, then added, almost shyly for such a capable man, "And then you woke up and started talking to me, and I found I liked listening to you, liked talking to you. You are different from most women I have met out here. You are honest and practical, but you have not let this hard country make you hard. I admire that." Winona felt her cheeks warm, and not from any fever. "I could say much the same about you," she said quietly. "You have been unfailingly kind, but there is a core of steel in you too. I have seen it in the way you handle problems, the way you took charge when I was too weak to help myself. You did not ask permission or wait for someone else to step in. You just acted. Guess we are alike in that way," Oliver said with a slight smile. "Both too stubborn to wait for the world to offer us what we need, so we go out and take it ourselves. A dangerous quality out here," Winona observed. "Maybe," Oliver agreed, "but also necessary. The meek do not exactly inherit the earth in Arizona territory." They shared a smile, and in that moment, Winona felt something shift between them, an understanding that went beyond gratitude or simple friendship. It was too soon, too fast, the practical part of her mind warned. She barely knew this man. But her heart, which had been locked away since she had lost her parents and set out on this lonely journey west, recognized something in Oliver Quinn that called to her in a way she could not ignore. After Oliver left, Winona sat for a long time in the fading afternoon light, her hands idle in her lap. She should be planning which projects to tackle first, which clients to contact to let them know she was available for work again. Instead, she found herself replaying every conversation she had had with Oliver, remembering the way his face looked when he smiled, the deep timbre of his voice, the gentleness in his hands when he had helped her drink water during the worst of her fever. This was foolish, she told herself firmly. She had a business to rebuild and a sister to visit once she was strong enough to travel. Romance was a luxury she could not afford, especially not with a cowboy who probably earned $30 a month and had no prospects beyond the next season's cattle drive. She needed stability, security, a way to ensure she would never again be left destitute and dependent on the charity of strangers. But even as she thought it, Winona knew she was lying to herself. Oliver Quinn had not felt like a stranger since the moment she had woken in the back of her wagon and heard his voice saying he had her, that she would be all right. And the way he had looked at her just now, the words he had spoken about wanting to know her, suggested that he might feel the same unexpected connection she did. The next days fell into a new rhythm. Winona worked to rebuild her strength, taking on small sewing projects that would not overtax her but would bring in some much-needed income. She owed Oliver money for the doctor, and she owed the boarding house for her room, and her savings were nearly depleted. Pride demanded she repay her debts as soon as possible, even if Oliver had not mentioned them again. True to his word, Oliver came to check on her 3 days later, arriving in the early evening when the worst of the day's heat had passed. He brought a basket of food from the ranch cook, who he said had been horrified to learn that Winona was recovering alone with no one to make sure she ate properly. "Maria is convinced that all illness can be cured with enough beans and tortillas," Oliver said, setting the basket on Winona's small table. "I did not have the heart to tell her you probably had no appetite, so I hope you will at least try some. She will ask me about it, and I am a terrible liar." Winona laughed, the sound feeling good after so many days of sickness and worry. "Tell Maria I said thank you, and that it smells wonderful. I actually am hungry for the first time in weeks." They shared the food, sitting across from each other at the small table, and talked about everything and nothing. Oliver told her stories about the ranch, about the ornery bull that had tried to gore him last week, and the new foal that had been born with markings like a map of Texas. Winona told him about her clients, the rancher's wife who wanted a dress in the latest fashion from a magazine that was 2 years out of date, the saloon girl who had come to her in secret asking for something respectable to wear to church. "You do not judge them," Oliver observed. "The saloon girls, I mean. Some women in town would not take their business." "Why would I judge?" Winona said. "We all do what we must to survive. If sewing dresses for them helps them feel more human, more valued, then I am glad to do it. God knows this world gives women few enough choices as it is." Oliver nodded slowly, something like approval in his eyes. "That is what I thought you would say. You have a generous heart, Winona Miller." "I have a practical heart," Winona corrected. "I know what it is to be desperate and alone. If I can ease someone else's burden, even in a small way, then perhaps my own struggles have meant something." They talked until the stars came out and the desert cooled around them, until Winona realized she was more comfortable with this man she had known barely 2 weeks than she had been with people she had known for years. There was an ease between them, a natural fit, as if their conversations were a dance they had been practicing together for decades rather than days. When Oliver finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "Winona, I know this might be forward of me and you can say no without any hurt feelings, but would you allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean. Not just checking to see if you are well, but courting, if you have any interest in that." Winona's heart leaped in her chest, but she forced herself to consider the question seriously rather than just blurting out yes. "Oliver, I do have interest. More than I probably should, given how recently we met, but I need you to understand my situation. I have nothing. No family to speak of except my sister. No money beyond what I can earn with my needle. No prospects or property or anything of value to bring to a courtship. And I have responsibilities. Once I am fully recovered, I need to travel to Wickenburg to see my sister, to find out what crisis has her so worried. I cannot promise you any kind of future when my own path is so uncertain. Oliver listened to all of this without interruption, and when she finished, he smiled. Winona, I am a cowboy making $35 a month and living in a bunkhouse with 5 other men. I am in no position to demand anything from anyone, but I like you. I like talking to you, being around you. I think we understand each other in a way that does not come along often. So I am not asking for promises or commitments. I am just asking if I can spend time with you, get to know you better, and let you get to know me. Whatever comes after that, we will figure out together. What do you say? What could she say to that except yes? They were both practical people, both survivors who had learned not to expect more from life than what they could carve out with their own 2 hands. But maybe, just maybe, they could carve out something together that would be stronger than what either could build alone. Yes, Winona said, and the smile that spread across Oliver's face made her feel like she had just given him something precious beyond measure. You can call on me. I would like that very much. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Winona had imagined for herself. In Missouri, courtship had been formal, constrained by social rules and family expectations, conducted in parlors under the watchful eyes of chaperones. Here in Chloride, in this rough mining town clinging to the side of a mountain, courtship was simpler and more honest. Oliver came to see her whenever his work allowed, which was usually 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes they walked together through town, greeting neighbors and browsing the limited goods in the general store. Sometimes they sat on the narrow balcony outside her room and watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes Oliver brought his horse and they rode out into the hills, Winona seated in front of him on the saddle since she had not yet fully regained her strength, his arms steady around her as they explored the hidden beauty of this harsh land. Through it all, they talked. About their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Oliver told her about growing up the youngest of 6 children in a struggling family, about leaving home at 16 to find his own way because there were too many mouths to feed and not enough to go around. He had worked cattle drives and freight wagons, mines and railroads, anything that would pay enough to keep him fed and clothed. He had seen men die for no good reason and fortunes lost on the turn of a card. He had learned to trust his instincts and to value people who did what they said they would do. Winona shared her own story, the genteel poverty of her childhood, the pride that had kept her parents from admitting how badly they were struggling until it was too late. She talked about the shock of discovering the debts after her father's death, the humiliation of having to sell everything they owned to pay creditors who showed no mercy. She described the loneliness of the journey west, the fear that she would fail, that she lacked whatever quality was required to survive in this unforgiving place. "But you did not fail," Oliver said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky. "You built a business from nothing. You found clients and earned their trust. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Winona said wryly. "I am not always sure which drove me more." "Does it matter?" Oliver asked. "You survived. You are still here, still fighting. That is what counts." As summer deepened and Winona's health fully returned, she began to think seriously about the journey to Wickenburg. She had been exchanging telegrams with her sister, who insisted that while she did need to discuss something important, it could wait until Winona was completely well. But Winona could read between the lines of those brief messages, could sense an anxiety that her sister was trying to hide. Whatever was happening, it was serious, and Winona needed to be there. When she told Oliver she was planning to leave within the week, he simply nodded and said, "I will request time from my boss. The summer work is slowing down anyway, and he owes me some days. I will come with you." "Oliver, you do not have to do that," Winona protested, though her heart soared at the offer. "I am well now, I can manage." "I know you can," Oliver said patiently, "but I want to come. I want to meet your sister, see this place that has you so worried. And honestly, Winona, I cannot stomach the thought of you making that journey alone. Call it selfish, but I will sleep better knowing I am there if anything goes wrong." In the end, Winona agreed, because she wanted his company and because she was learning to accept help when it was freely offered. They spent 2 days preparing, checking the wagon thoroughly, laying in supplies and planning their route. They would follow the road south and west, covering about 30 miles a day if the weather held and they encountered no trouble. With luck, they would reach Wickenburg in 3 days, perhaps 4. They left Chloride in the cool of early morning, the town still mostly asleep, as Oliver drove Winona's wagon down the main street and out onto the desert road. He had insisted she ride in the back for the first part of the journey, to save her strength, but Winona had refused. She was not an invalid anymore, and she wanted to sit beside him, to share the adventure of the journey rather than hiding away like fragile cargo. So they sat together on the driver's bench, close enough that their shoulders sometimes touched as the wagon swayed, and talked or rode in comfortable silence as the landscape unfolded around them. The road wound down from the Surbat Mountains into broader valleys dotted with saguaro cactus and palavered trees. They passed the occasional ranch, small settlements clinging to life in the vastness, and other travelers heading north with supplies or dreams or desperation driving them onward. At midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple meal in the shade of a ramada someone had built beside a spring. The water was cool and clean, a precious gift in this dry country, and they filled their canteens and let Daisy drink her fill before continuing on. "Tell me about your sister," Oliver said as they rolled through the afternoon heat. "What is she like?" "Wilhelmina is 3 years older than me," Winona said. "When we were children, she was always the brave one, the one who would climb higher and run faster and argue with our father when she thought he was wrong. She left for Arizona as soon as she could save the money, ready to make her fortune. Last I heard, she had married a man named Thomas and was helping him run a small ranch outside Wickenburg." "You are worried about her," Oliver observed. "I am," Winona admitted. "The telegrams have been strange, urgent but vague. It is not like Wilhelmina to be mysterious. She has always been direct, almost blunt. For her to dance around something suggests she does not want to commit the details to a telegram where anyone might read them." "Could be financial trouble," Oliver suggested. "Ranching is hard out here. Water rights alone can bankrupt a family if they are not careful." "Maybe," Winona said, though something told her it was more personal than that. "I guess I will find out soon enough." They made camp that night beside the road, Oliver laying out bedrolls on opposite sides of a small fire while Winona prepared a simple supper. The desert night surrounded them with its strange sounds, the yips of coyotes in the distance and the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Above them, the stars were so thick they looked like spilled salt across the black fabric of the sky. "You ever miss Missouri?" Oliver asked as they sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. "Sometimes," Winona said honestly. "I miss the green of it, the way rain falls soft in spring. But I do not miss being that person I was there. The girl who was afraid of everything, who could not imagine a life beyond what her parents had planned. Coming west forced me to become stronger, braver." I would not trade that, even for all the green grass in Missouri." "I understand that," Oliver said. "Texas is home in my heart, but I am not the same person I was when I left. Maybe none of us are. Maybe that is the point of places like this. They burn away who you were and leave behind who you really are." "That is a harsh philosophy," Winona said softly. "But true, I think," Oliver replied. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Winona, I want you to know that whatever we find in Wickenburg, whatever your sister needs, I will help however I can. You are not alone in this. Not anymore." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Winona's eyes. For so long she had been alone, carrying every burden by herself because there was no one else to share the weight. The idea that she might have found someone who wanted to stand beside her, who saw her strength but also her need for support, was almost overwhelming in its beauty. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than I can say." They reached Wickenburg on the afternoon of the fourth day, the town sprawling along the Hassaamper River in a way that made it seem more established, more permanent than Chloride's desperate clinging to the mountainside. There were actual streets here, buildings made of brick as well as wood, and a sense that civilization had gained a stronger foothold. Winona directed Oliver to the address her sister had given her, a small ranch house about 2 miles outside of town proper. As they approached, Winona's stomach twisted with nerves. The house looked well maintained, the corrals neat and the garden flourishing despite the heat, but there was something too quiet about the place, as if it were holding its breath. Before they had even stopped the wagon, the front door opened and a woman emerged, tall and dark-haired, her face breaking into a mixture of relief and worry when she saw Winona. Wilhelmina. She looked older than Winona remembered, worn down by sun and work, but her eyes were the same sharp blue that Winona saw in her own mirror. "Winnie," Wilhelmina said, using the childhood nickname as she hurried forward. "Thank God you are here. I was beginning to think you would never come." Winona climbed down from the wagon, Oliver steadying her with a hand on her elbow, and embraced her sister. Wilhelmina held her tightly, and Winona could feel the tension thrumming through her body. "I came as fast as I could," Winona said. "I was ill for a while, but I am well now." "Wilhelmina, this is Oliver Quinn. He helped me when I was sick, and he insisted on escorting me here. Oliver, my sister Wilhelmina." Oliver had removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Madam, pleased to meet you." Wilhelmina looked between them with eyes that missed nothing, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips despite the worry creasing her forehead. "Pleased to meet you as well, Mr. Quinn. Thank you for bringing my sister safely. Will you come inside? Both of you, we have much to discuss." The inside of the house was simple but comfortable, furnished with sturdy pieces and softened with small touches that spoke of a woman's hand. But Winona noticed immediately that there were no signs of a man's presence. No boots by the door, no hat on the hook, no pipe or tobacco pouch on the table. "Where is Thomas?" Winona asked as Wilhelmina poured them water from a clay jug. Wilhelmina's face tightened and she was silent for a long moment before answering. "Thomas is gone. That is why I needed you here, why I sent those telegrams." "Gone," Winona repeated. "Do you mean he left you?" "I mean he is dead," Wilhelmina said bluntly, and the pain in her voice was raw despite the directness of the words. "He was killed 4 months ago, thrown from his horse and broke his neck. It was instant, the doctor said. He did not suffer." "Oh, Wilhelmina," Winona breathed, moving to embrace her sister again. "I am so sorry. Why did you not tell me sooner?" "Because I was in shock at first, and then I was trying to figure out what to do, and by the time I had my wits about me enough to reach out, you were already sick, and I did not want to add to your burdens," Wilhelmina said. She pulled away and wiped at her eyes impatiently. "But now I need help, Winnie. Real help. The ranch is mine. Thomas left it to me in his will, but I cannot run it alone. I have been trying, but it is too much for one person. The cattle need constant attention. There are fences that need mending, water that needs managing. I have hired hands who come and go, but no one permanent, no one I can really rely on." She looked at Oliver then, assessing him with the same sharp gaze she had turned on Winona. "Mr. Quinn, my sister seems to trust you, and that is no small thing. Winona was always the better judge of character between us. Are you employed at present, or might you be looking for new work?" Oliver blinked, clearly surprised by the direct question. "I work for the Double Bar Ranch outside Chloride, madam. Good job, fair pay. But I took time off to escort Winona here. I suppose I could see about an extended leave if she needs to stay for a while." "What if I offered you a permanent position?" Wilhelmina said. "I need someone who knows cattle and horses, someone who can take charge of the day-to-day operations while I handle the business side. I can pay $40 a month and board. It is a small operation, only about 200 head right now, but it is good land with good water rights. There is potential here if it is properly managed." Winona stared at her sister in shock. "Wilhelmina, you cannot just offer Oliver a job like that. He has a life in Chloride, responsibilities." "Let him speak for himself," Wilhelmina said calmly. "Mr. Quinn, I realize this is sudden, but I have learned that sometimes opportunities present themselves in unexpected ways. If you are interested, the job is yours. If not, I understand and there are no hard feelings." Oliver looked at Winona, his expression unreadable. "Could we have a moment to discuss this privately?" "Of course," Wilhelmina said. "I need to check on the stock anyway. Take your time." When Wilhelmina had gone, Winona turned to Oliver, her thoughts spinning. "You do not have to do this. She has put you in an impossible position, and I am mortified that she would be so forward." "Do not be," Oliver said mildly. "She is desperate and practical, two qualities I respect. But Winona, this decision affects you as much as me. If I take this job, I would be staying here in Wickenburg, not returning to Chloride. Which means you would have to decide what you want to do. Stay here with your sister, or go back to your business in Chloride. And I want you to know, I am not going to make that choice for you by deciding one way or the other about the job. What do you want?" Winona sank into a chair, her mind racing. What did she want? A week ago, she would have said she wanted to return to Chloride, to rebuild her business and establish herself as a respected dressmaker. But that was before she had seen her sister's grief, before she had understood the depth of Wilhelmina's need. This ranch represented her sister's entire future. If it failed, Wilhelmina would have nothing, would be in the same desperate position Winona had been in when she fled Missouri. But beyond that, Winona had to admit that the thought of returning to Chloride without Oliver left her feeling hollow. In the past weeks, he had become essential to her happiness in a way she had not anticipated. The courtship was still new, still tentative, but it had roots that ran deep, and she was not ready to tear them up. "I want to help my sister," Winona said slowly. "But I also do not want to lose what we have started to build together. So I suppose the question is, can we build it here instead of in Chloride?" Oliver smiled, the expression lighting his whole face. "I think we can build it anywhere, as long as we are together. And honestly, running my own operation, even a small one, is more than I ever thought I would get the chance to do. If your sister is serious about the offer, I would like to accept it." "Then we stay," Winona said, feeling certainty settle over her like a warm blanket. "I can sew anywhere, and Wickenburg is larger than Chloride. There will be clients here, women who need dresses and alterations. We will make it work." When Wilhelmina returned, they told her their decision, and the relief on her face was profound. "You do not know what this means to me," she said. "Having family here, having help I can trust. I have felt so alone these past months." "You are not alone anymore," Winona said firmly. "We will figure this out together. That is what family does." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. Oliver threw himself into learning the ranch, riding out each morning to assess the cattle and the land, meeting with the few hired hands Wilhelmina had retained, and planning improvements and changes. He had a natural authority that the men responded to, and within days, he had reorganized the work schedule and prioritized the most urgent repairs. Winona divided her time between helping Wilhelmina with the house and beginning to establish her dressmaking business in Wickenburg. She placed advertisements in the local newspaper, visited the handful of dress shops to introduce herself and make clear she was not competition, but rather someone who could handle custom work they could not, and slowly began to build a client base. It was harder than it had been in Chloride, where the sheer scarcity of skilled seamstresses had worked in her favor. But Winona was nothing if not persistent. Through it all, her relationship with Oliver continued to deepen. They saw each other every day, working side by side on the ranch or stealing moments alone in the evening to walk along the river and talk. Oliver was courting her properly now, with the kind of respect and attention that made Winona feel cherished rather than merely useful. He brought her wildflowers from the hills and listened with genuine interest when she talked about the latest fashion trends. He made her laugh with stories about the stubborn cow who had tried to drown herself in the water tank, and the hired hand who was convinced the ranch was haunted by the ghost of an Apache warrior. One evening, about 2 months after they had arrived in Wickenburg, Oliver asked Winona to walk with him to the spot where the Hassaamper River curved around a stand of cottonwood trees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the water in a shimmer of gold. "I have been thinking," Oliver said as they stood watching the light fade, "about us, about the future, and I realize I need to know something before I can make any more plans." Winona's heart began to beat faster. "What do you need to know?" "I need to know if you love me," Oliver said simply. "Because I love you, Winona. I think I started falling the moment I saw you fighting to stay conscious on that wagon, refusing to give in even when your body was failing. And every day since then, I have fallen harder. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. Strong and kind, practical but not cold, beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your face and everything to do with your spirit. So I need to know if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, because if you do, I want to marry you. I want to build a life together, here on this ranch with your sister, or anywhere else the wind takes us. I do not have much to offer you except my hands and my heart, but they are yours if you want them." Tears streamed down Winona's face, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "I have been afraid to admit it, afraid it was too soon or too intense, but I love you, Oliver Quinn. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you made me believe I could have something more than mere survival. You made me hope again." Oliver pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Winona could hear the rapid beating of his heart matching her own. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "You will marry me?" "Yes," Winona said, pulling back just enough to look up into his face. "1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wickenburg, with Wilhelmina standing beside Winona and one of the ranch hands standing beside Oliver. Winona wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had been saving for something special. pale blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Oliver wore his best shirt and pants, his boots polished to a shine, and looked at Winona as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about the challenges of building a life in this harsh territory, and about the importance of standing together against whatever trials might come. Winona barely heard the words, too focused on Oliver's hand holding hers, warm and solid and real, proof that this was happening, that she had found something rare and precious in this unforgiving land. When Oliver kissed her at the end of the ceremony, the small gathering of guests cheered, and Winona felt a joy so complete. It seemed impossible that just a few months ago she had been alone and sick, believing she might die in the desert without anyone to mourn her passing. They held a simple reception at the ranch, the hired hands bringing out a fiddle and creating music, while Wilhelmina and several neighbor women laid out food. It was not fancy or elegant, but it was genuine, and the people who came were people who had come to respect Oliver's work and Winona's kindness in the short time they had been in Wickenburg. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Oliver led Winona away from the noise and celebration to the small cabin that had been prepared for them, a building that had once been used for storage, but which Wilhelmina and the hired hands had converted into a cozy living space in preparation for the wedding. "Alone at last," Oliver said with a grin as he closed the door behind them, and Winona laughed, nervous and excited and filled with a love so fierce it threatened to burst out of her skin. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. But the foundation they had built during their courtship was strong, and they worked through the small conflicts and misunderstandings with humor and patience. Oliver was a considerate husband, thoughtful in ways that surprised Winona given how rough and practical he had to be in his work. He brought her coffee in the morning and rubbed her sore shoulders in the evening after she had spent hours bent over her sewing machine. He listened when she talked about her clients and offered advice when she asked for it, but never assumed he knew better than she did about her own work. Winona, in turn, learned to support Oliver's decisions about the ranch without undermining his authority in front of the hired hands, even when she had concerns or disagreed with his approach. She learned which foods he preferred and how he liked his shirts laundered. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, fragments of a harder past he did not often speak about, and that the best way to help was simply to hold him until the dreams released their grip. Together, they helped Wilhelmina stabilize the ranch and then grow it. Oliver's skill with cattle and his instinct for the land proved invaluable, and within a year, they had increased the herd and improved the property in ways that made it genuinely profitable. Wilhelmina began to smile again, the grief of Thomas's death softening into something she could carry without it crushing her. She and Winona grew closer than they had been even as children, the shared work and shared life creating bonds that distance and time had once weakened. Winona's dressmaking business also flourished. She developed a reputation for quality work and fair prices, and soon she had more commissions than she could handle alone. Wilhelmina sometimes helped with the simpler tasks, and eventually Winona took on an apprentice, a young Mexican girl named Rosa who showed real talent with a needle and desperately needed the work to support her widowed mother. Life fell into a pattern that was satisfying in its purposefulness. There were hard times, of course. A drought one summer that decimated the herd and left them scrambling to keep the remaining cattle alive. A winter so cold it killed half the chickens and cracked the water troughs. A dispute with a neighbor over water rights that nearly escalated into violence before cooler heads prevailed. But through it all, Winona and Oliver faced each challenge as a team, their love deepening with each trial overcome. 2 years after their wedding, Winona discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had seen how dangerous childbirth could be on the frontier, had attended the funerals of women who had not survived the ordeal. But Oliver's excitement was so pure, so unguarded, that it helped ease her fears. "We are going to have a family," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "A child of our own. I never thought I would have this, Winona. I thought I would just work ranches until I was too old, then die alone somewhere. But you have given me everything." "We have given each other everything," Winona corrected gently. "I would be dead if not for you, Oliver. Or at best, still struggling alone in chloride, wondering if I would ever have more than a room above a store and a handful of clients. You showed me what it means to be truly partnered with someone, to build something together that is stronger than what either of us could have built alone." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Winona's fears. She continued to work for as long as she could, the sewing being something she could do even as her belly grew and made other tasks difficult. Wilhelmina fussed over her constantly, and Oliver treated her as if she were made of spun glass, despite Winona's protests that she was not an invalid. In the spring of 1885, on a mild afternoon when the desert was carpeted with wildflowers, Winona went into labor. Wilhelmina had arranged for a midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Oliver was banished to the barn with strict instructions not to come back until summoned, though Winona could hear him pacing outside the cabin throughout the long hours of labor. The pain was worse than anything Winona had imagined, waves of agony that left her gasping and crying out despite her attempts to stay quiet. But Mrs. Henderson was calm and encouraging, and Wilhelmina held Winona's hand and spoke to her in a steady stream of reassurance. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the cabin in golden light, Winona's son was born, his first cry loud and indignant. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson said, placing the tiny, red-faced infant on Winona's chest. "A fine, healthy boy. Congratulations, my dear." Winona stared down at her son through tears of exhaustion and wonder. He was so small, so perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would probably be blue like hers. She traced his tiny fingers, marveling at the miniature perfection of his nails, and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost painful. "Get Oliver," she said to Wilhelmina. "He needs to meet his son." Oliver came in moments later, his face pale and anxious until he saw Winona sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, with the baby in her arms. Then his expression transformed into something so tender and awed that Winona fell in love with him all over again. "A son," Oliver breathed, approaching slowly as if afraid to break the spell. "We have a son." "We do," Winona agreed. "Would you like to hold him?" Oliver took the baby with the careful reverence of someone handling something infinitely precious, and Winona watched as her husband became a father right before her eyes. Oliver looked down at his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Hello, little one. I am your father. I promise I will always protect you and love you and do my best to be worthy of you. You are the best thing I have ever been part of creating." They named him Samuel, after Oliver's father who had died when Oliver was young. Samuel Quinn grew into a bright, curious child who loved following his father around the ranch and climbing into his mother's lap to watch her sew. He had Oliver's dark hair and Winona's blue eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone from the hired hands to the stern lady who ran the general store in town. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Winona had a daughter they named Margaret, called Maggie from the moment she drew her first breath. Maggie was fiercer than her brother, more demanding and more quick to laugh or cry. She looked like Wilhelmina, with dark hair and sharp features that promised beauty when she grew older. The ranch continued to prosper under Oliver's management. They expanded the herd further and began breeding horses as well as cattle. Oliver's skill with animals creating a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Phoenix. Winona's sewing business had evolved into something more substantial. A proper shop in town with Rosa now a full partner rather than an apprentice, handling much of the day-to-day work while Winona focused on the more complex commissions and on raising her children. Wilhelmina never remarried, though she had offers. She seemed content to pour her energy into the ranch and into being the best aunt possible to Samuel and Maggie. She taught them to ride and to read, told them stories about Missouri and about their grandparents they would never meet, and provided a stable, loving presence that enriched all their lives. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Oliver took Winona back to the spot by the river where he had proposed, leaving the children with Wilhelmina for the evening. They sat on a blanket under the cottonwood trees, watching the stars emerge as the desert cooled around them. "You ever regret it?" Oliver asked. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the independence you worked so hard to achieve?" Winona turned to look at him in surprise. "Is that what you think? That I gave something up, did you not?" Oliver asked. "You were building something for yourself in Chloride, a business and a life that was entirely your own. Now you are a wife and mother, and yes, you still so, but it is not the same as it would have been if you had remained unmarried." "Oliver Quinn, you are a fool if you think I gave anything up," Winona said firmly. "I gained everything that matters. Yes, my life is different than it would have been, but it is fuller, richer, more joyful than anything I could have built alone. I have you, I have our children, I have my sister close by and a home that is truly mine. I have love and partnership and purpose. How could I possibly regret that?" Oliver pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I just want to make sure you are happy, that you do not feel trapped." "I have never been less trapped," Winona said. "I am free in all the ways that matter. Free to love and be loved, free to work at something I enjoy, free to watch my children grow and know they will have better opportunities than I did. That is not a cage, Oliver. That is a gift." As the years passed, that gift only grew more precious. Samuel and Maggie were joined by another son, William, and then another daughter, Caroline. The cabin that had seemed spacious for 2 became cramped with 6, and Oliver and the hired hands built a larger house, a real ranch house with separate bedrooms and a kitchen big enough for Winona to cook for the whole operation during the busy seasons. The children grew healthy and strong, educated by a combination of Wilhelmina's tutoring and the small schoolhouse that had finally been built in Wickenburg. Samuel showed an early aptitude for ranching, following Oliver everywhere and absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Maggie was more interested in Winona's sewing, though she also had her aunt's head for business and talked about one day opening a proper dress shop in Phoenix. William was the dreamer, always reading when he could get his hands on books, talking about seeing the ocean and traveling to San Francisco. Caroline, the baby, was still too young to show clear inclinations, but she had a sweetness that reminded Winona of Oliver, a kindness that extended to every creature she encountered. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the more successful operations in the region. Oliver took on more hired hands and eventually a second foreman to help manage the increased workload. He and Winona became respected members of the community, the kind of people others came to for advice or help when times were hard. They hosted gatherings at the ranch, feeding neighbors and celebrating together the small victories that made frontier life bearable. Wilhelmina remained a constant presence, growing older alongside Winona, but never losing the sharpness that had always defined her. She helped raise the children, managed the business side of the ranch with increasing skill, and became known in her own right as a woman of intelligence and capability. She and Winona often sat together in the evenings, sewing or mending while the children played nearby, and the men worked in the barns and talked about how far they had come from those desperate Missouri girls who had thought the West was their only option. "We made the right choice," Wilhelmina said one evening when Samuel was 12 and Caroline was 3, a span of years that seemed impossible but undeniable. "Coming here, building this life. We could have stayed in Missouri and lived safe, small lives. Instead, we took the risk, and look what we have." "We have everything," Winona agreed, watching Oliver teaching Samuel how to work with a difficult horse, his patience and skill evident in every movement. "I never imagined I could be this happy. There were so many times I thought I would not survive, that the West would break me. But it made me instead, made us all." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Oliver gave Winona a gift that made her cry. It was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted, and inside was a folded piece of paper. When Winona opened it, she found a deed. Oliver had bought the land adjacent to the ranch, expanding their holdings significantly, and he had put the deed in her name alone. "I know the ranch is in Wilhelmina's name, as it should be since it was Thomas's," Oliver explained. "But I wanted you to have land that was yours, that could never be taken from you no matter what happens. Security for you and for our children. You came west with nothing, Winona, but you will never be without resources again. I promise you that." Winona held the deed with shaking hands, understanding the profound gift he had just given her. Land meant security, meant power, meant the ability to survive whatever hardships might come. It was more than just property. It was Oliver's way of ensuring she would never again be the desperate woman she had been when she arrived in Arizona, dependent on the kindness of strangers and her own determination to survive. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this, but for everything. For seeing me that day on the road. For taking the reins and sitting beside me when I was too weak to drive my wagon alone. For loving me and building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Oliver Quinn." "No," Oliver said, pulling her into his arms. "You are the best thing that happened to me. You gave me a reason to be more than just a drifting cowboy. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you." They held each other for a long time, there in the house they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. Outside, they could hear their children playing, Wilhelmina calling them in for supper, the normal sounds of a thriving household. It was not the life Winona had imagined for herself when she set out from Missouri all those years ago. It was infinitely better. As the years continued to unfold, the ranch became a legacy rather than just a business. Samuel took over more of the daily management, revealing a skill that matched and perhaps even exceeded Oliver's. Maggie did indeed open a dress shop, though in Wickenburg rather than Phoenix, partnering with Rosa to create a business that served women throughout the region. William went east to college, funded by careful savings and the profits from several good years, and came back with ideas about water conservation and land management that helped the ranch adapt to the challenges of a changing territory. Caroline grew into a young woman of remarkable compassion, eventually becoming a teacher in the expanding school system. Winona and Oliver grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and desert living, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, the passion of their early years maturing into something more profound, a partnership so complete that they could communicate with a look or a touch, understanding each other's thoughts without words. Wilhelmina, too, aged gracefully, her sharp mind remaining keen even as her body slowed. She lived to see all 4 of her nieces and nephews grown and married, producing a new generation of children who filled the ranch with noise and laughter. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by family, her face peaceful and her work in the world complete. Winona mourned her sister deeply, but found comfort in knowing that Wilhelmina had lived a full life, had overcome the tragedy of Thomas's death to build something lasting and meaningful. The ranch that Wilhelmina had fought so hard to preserve continued to thrive, now operated jointly by Samuel and William, with Maggie and Caroline playing supporting roles in various aspects of the business. On a summer afternoon when Winona was 68 years old, she and Oliver sat together on the porch of their house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 8 of them now, ranging from Samuel's eldest, a serious boy of 14, to Caroline's youngest, a girl of 3 who reminded Winona achingly of Maggie at that age. "We did all right," Oliver said, his hand finding Winona's and squeezing gently. "Did we not?" "We did more than all right," Winona replied. "We built something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone." "I love you, Winona Quinn," Oliver said, using her married name with the same affection he had used since the day they wed. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you fighting to survive on that wagon seat, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you," Winona said, turning to look at the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. His face was lined now, weathered by decades under the Arizona sun, but his eyes were the same eyes that had looked at her with such concern and kindness that first day. "You took the reins when I was too weak to drive my wagon alone, and you have been beside me ever since. I could not have asked for a better partner, a better husband, a better father to our children. You are my home, Oliver. You always have been." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the desert in the golds and crimsons and purples that Winona had learned to love as much as the green hills of Missouri she had left behind so long ago. The children played, their grandchildren creating memories that would carry into yet another generation. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to hard work and determination and love. This was the life Winona had built from nothing, starting from that moment of weakness when she had felt herself falling from her wagon seat, certain she was about to die alone in the desert. Instead, a cowboy had appeared, had taken the reins, had sat beside her and guided her to safety. And from that moment of vulnerability had grown something strong and enduring, a love story written across the harsh landscape of the Arizona frontier. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Winona thought about that desperate woman she had been all those years ago, sick and alone and convinced her luck had finally run out. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, the joy and the family and the deep, abiding love that would define the rest of her days, would she even believe it? Probably not. That woman had been too beaten down by loss and hardship to imagine such happiness, but it had happened. Not because of luck or fate, but because 2 people had met at the right moment, had recognized in each other something worth fighting for, and had chosen to build a life together despite all the obstacles in their way. It had not always been easy. There had been moments of doubt and fear, times when the challenges seemed insurmountable. But they had faced every trial together, and that had made all the difference. Winona squeezed Oliver's hand, feeling the calluses and strength that were as familiar to her now as her own skin. This was her happily ever after, not perfect but real, not free from struggle but filled with love strong enough to weather any storm. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person, in the cowboy who had taken the reins when she was too weak to drive her wagon alone, who had sat beside her and never left. As the desert night settled around them, and their grandchildren were finally called inside for supper, Winona and Oliver remained on the porch a little longer, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. They had built a good life together, a life that had started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road and had grown into something neither could have predicted. Their love had created a family, had transformed a struggling ranch into a thriving legacy, had proven that even in the hardest places, beauty and joy could flourish if tended with care and devotion. In the distance, a coyote called, its voice echoing across the darkening hills. Oliver stood, offering his hand to help Winona to her feet, and together they walked inside to join their family. Their steps matched after so many years of walking side by side. The door closed behind them, shutting out the desert night, and inside there was light and warmth and the sound of voices raised in laughter. This was the ending Winona had never dared to hope for, the fairy tale she had stopped believing in when her parents died and left her with nothing but grief and debt. But fairy tales, she had learned, were not always about princes and castles. Sometimes they were about cowboys and wagons, about the courage to accept help when it was offered, about the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared in unexpected forms. Sometimes the greatest romance was not the whirlwind passion of youth, but the steady, enduring partnership of two people who chose each other every day, through every trial, until they could no longer imagine life apart. Winona Miller, who had become Winona Quinn on a spring day in 1884, had found her happily ever after. And it was more wonderful than any story she could have imagined, precisely because it was real, earned through hardship and sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to the cowboy who had saved her life, and then made that life worth living. They had built their love story one day at a time, one choice at a time, until it had become something unshakable, a foundation upon which generations would continue to build. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.